I recently dropped out of an anti-statin support group, and no, I haven't gone pro-statin. I'll explain why I quit the group, but first I want to lay out my 7 truths and 3 beliefs about statins to provide context for this. Stay tuned. I've picked up a lot of new subscribers lately, so now would be a good time to give an overview of what this channel is about. There's 2 types of positions I take. Those I hold firmly are at the core of whatever I present. If you don't agree with me on these, you're probably not going to find a lot of value in what I have to say. For example, if you're a pro-statin medical professional, you won't agree with me very much. Second are the beliefs that I hold tentatively or provisionally. I mean, these could change based on new evidence and new ways of looking at them. You may disagree with me on them, but still find value here. I could even change my mind on them. Here are my 7 firmly held positions. First, statins aren't wonder drugs. I've heard medical professionals say this, statins are wonder drugs, and they really should know better. Do we really think that a drug with a number needed to treat in the double and sometimes triple digits is a wonder drug? What about a drug that hurts more people than it helps? Is that a wonder drug? It's this wonder drug status that makes them so dangerous. Second, adverse effects are real. Too many of us have been belittled with statements like statins don't cause that. I heard that constantly when I first started to figure out that statins were ruining my health, and for all I know, my doctor really believed it. Third, the nocebo effect is exaggerated. You know, what happens in a research lab, that's not the same as real life. Practicing physicians report anywhere from 6% to 30% of their patients are truly statin intolerant. And no, 90% of the adverse effects are not nocebo effect. The studies I looked into, they were so deeply flawed that I'm just shocked that they passed peer review. Basically, they torture the data until the data confesses to whatever they want to hear. Fourth, statins are overprescribed, and this gets back to that wonder drug status. If you take all the people on statins, the number who are either not helped or are actually injured far outnumber the people who are helped. Most people on statins aren't even going to have a heart attack, even if they were left untreated. Think about it. The medical profession wants people with a 10-year cardiovascular risk of 7.5% to take statins. In other words, the risk is 92.5% that you're not going to have a heart attack. And yeah, 7.5% over 10 years will compound over the decades, but over 40 years, if you had a 7.5% chance of a heart attack each decade, you'd still have a 3 out of 4 chance after 40 years of not having had a heart attack. But you're not taking statins? Well, that's a financial risk that the pharmaceutical companies can't take. Fifth, standards of care include value judgments. Standards such as that 7.5% 10-year heart attack risk being a threshold for being on statins, it's not based on any coherent theory of science. It's an opinion. I'm not even saying whether it's a good or a bad opinion, but it is an opinion. Think about it. If you took 37 people with that risk, each of them would have to take the statin for the 10 years for 1 heart attack to be avoided. Prominent doctors call that a very effective therapy. That says more about the state of mind of these doctors than it does about statins. Sixth, population statistics are of limited value to individuals. One commentator that I've quoted before has dubbed this the public health paradox. The fact is you're more likely to be hurt by statins than help. The number needed to harm is between 3 and 10. And by harm, I mean that the patient finds these adverse effects to be intolerable, and I let the patient decide what's intolerable. Compare that to the number needed to treat. Those numbers are like 10 times higher. Well, the number needed to harm is supposed to be very high, and the number needed to treat is supposed to be very low. And we've got the opposite going with statins. Finally, results count. If statins eliminated all heart attacks the way a rabies vaccine eliminates rabies deaths, that would be a good result. But if you had a crystal ball and you knew you were going to have a heart attack over the next 10 years, you take statins, chances are 2 to 1, you're still going to have that heart attack. That's not a good result. If I change my diet because I want to reduce inflammation and my inflammatory markers go down, well, that's a good result. It has meaning to me. If my doctor sends me to a dietitian, she'll tell me to go on a low-fat diet. And if it doesn't change my lipid profile the way my doctor wants it to, the response will be, well, diet doesn't work for you, get on a statin. It should be, we gave you the wrong diet. Or maybe we're looking at the wrong thing. If you take statins and you can barely walk, well, that's the result, and it really counts. Then there are the things that I think are worth discussing. I hold these positions tentatively or provisionally. For example, I think of cholesterol in terms of quality rather than quantity. I mean, I do think cholesterol quality counts and that poor quality lipid panel results are an indication of heart risk. Things like trigs the HDL ratio. Some people swear by it, some people think it's BS, but I find it to be important. High levels of oxidized LDL, yeah, that's bad. So some LDL is bad. Whether you have pattern A or pattern B result from an LDL fractionation test, that's an important result. It means something to you. It might not mean much to your doctor depending on how up to date and how aware they are in this particular area. Cholesterol quantity and the need to lower cholesterol in some individuals does have to be taken seriously. The current standards calling for 200 to 240 milligrams per deciliter, that's about 5.2 to 6.2 millimoles per liter. Calling that borderline high, I don't think that's justified by the data, and I don't subscribe to these limits. My natural value seems to be in the mid 200s, and since my quality markers are good, I'm not concerned. What I am talking about is people with extremely high levels. When I had a transient global amnesia event, at the same time my cholesterol went up to about 310 milligrams per deciliter, or about 8 millimoles per liter. My high sensitivity C-reactive protein went up to over 4 and my blood pressure skyrocketed. I think there's a connection between these results and the amnesia event. My doctor's response was to try pushing ezetimibe on me, given that I can't take statins. I didn't know what caused it or if a third thing caused both, but I wanted my cholesterol down to its natural level for me. And this is important. I didn't want to do it with a drug, statins or otherwise. That's like taking the battery out of your carbon monoxide sensor because the beeping is giving you a headache. I want to lower it by figuring out what's really going on. Do I have inflammation? Because that's what I need to deal with. And then I watched my lipid levels return to normal on their own. So whatever happened, it was short-term. But you need to get to the source of the carbon monoxide, so to speak. Don't mess with the indicators. And then when a later test showed my level at 170 milligrams a deciliter, or about 4.6 millimoles per liter, the doctor dropped the subject without even a comment. Third, I avoid even hinting to people who have familial hypercholesterolemia or who are in secondary prevention that they shouldn't take statins. They are at high risk, and if something happened to them after they got off statins because of something I said, I'd feel like I contributed to their bad outcome. And their survivors would probably feel the same way, and that wouldn't be good for me. I'll get back to these items in green when I talk about why I dropped out of that support group. Now let's talk about value judgments. We're going to visualize our value judgments and see how they can differ among individuals. Take a look at this graph. The horizontal axis, that represents the absolute cardiovascular risk reduction we might get from taking a statin. The vertical axis represents the potential adverse effects from the statins. So there's two places on the graph that I think everybody would agree is objective and not subjective, and that is if a drug is 100% effective and has absolutely no side effects, no adverse effects, a reasonable person would say, yeah, you should take that drug, assuming it's treating a condition that you have. On the opposite extreme, if the drug is totally ineffective, well, then a reasonable person would reject taking that drug. So what we're going to do is we're going to represent our subjective values by coloring in this chart, where green means it's worth taking the drug, yellow means we'd have to think about it, get more information, and red says, no, we're not going to take the drug in these circumstances. So how this is colored represents your values, and it's up to you how to do it. My shading is shown here. It seems that medical professionals are much more liberal when it comes to prescribing drugs. They have a large green area and a very small red area. It's certainly smaller than I think is reasonable. So whenever you hear them say, oh, the benefits outweigh the risks, they're thinking in this way. They may not formalize it like this, but they're thinking in such a way that they have a big green section of their graph. The benefits outweigh the risk is a value judgment by definition. Let's get back to how I color in this chart and see where I stand. This first vertical line that I've drawn is the maximum theoretical statin benefit, a 36% relative risk reduction applied to 100% risk. If the relative risk reduction from the clinical studies really applies to something as high as 100%, but that number I get from the Lipitor ads. So if somehow you knew you were going to have a heart attack in the next 10 years, taking statins might give you a 36% reduction. The horizontal line here is my experience with statin adverse effects. I didn't get rhabdomyolysis, I didn't get necrotizing myositis, but I did get a lot of quality of life degrading adverse effects. I had peripheral neuropathy, I had earaches, I had mental fog, I had joint pains, I had shortness of breath. So I rate my experience as a little worse than maybe the middle of tolerability. So somebody whose life is threatened by rhabdomyolysis, they have the right to rate this as totally intolerable. The lines cross on the outer edge of the yellow according to my value system. I'd have to be 100% certain that there was nothing else I could do to avoid this heart attack that I'm going to have before I'd even consider taking statins. But that's not even my risk factor, and that's not even typical of people who are on statin. This line here represents the risk reduction you get if you have a 7.5% 10-year risk of a cardiovascular event. So for 7.5%, the actual risk reduction is like 2.7%. So that line is 2.7% of the way over. My actual risk between being 4.5 and 6.6%, that puts me closer to like 1.5 to 2.5% reduction. The reason I'm using the 7.5% here is because that's commonly used as the threshold for making people eligible for statins. In any case, it's in the red zone for me. So my values tell me that in no universe does it make sense for me to submit to statin therapy. If you look at it this way, it becomes clear how useless statins really are for many individuals, even though populations may benefit. My point is, it's not your doctor's values. It's not results of population studies. It's your values that should drive your decision on whether you take a statin or not. And maybe visualizing values like this as these color charts will help you ask some hard questions. You might decide your tolerance for side effects and your desire for benefits means you have a larger green area, and that's okay, but never be made to feel that your values are in any way inferior or subordinate to anybody else's, especially not your doctors, because they're the ones who are going to try to push you to take a statin even though you've got little cardiovascular risk and you stand to gain even less benefit. Finally, here's why I dropped out of that support group. First, I would have been expelled eventually anyway because I don't agree with the rules and I would have violated them at some point. To me, the rules, they amounted to a statement of faith. Thou shalt not disagree. You must conform. I'm not going to name the group, but the name would lead anybody to believe that their existence, their purpose was to help people who had to get off statins. And to be clear, I'm no way asking anybody to drop out of any anti-statin group that they find to be valuable. Those groups provide a lot of good information, support, and deeper details than I can go into. So the moderator of this group posted a rule that conflated the issue of not taking statins with the issue of whether cholesterol levels should ever need to be lowered. And I call that preemptive conflation. I've called it in other videos. Preemptive conflation is when a position is taken that eliminates a more specific position. In this case, you won't even need to consider statins if we insist that cholesterol levels don't matter. I mean, that's what statins do. There's an absurd obsession in the medical profession about total cholesterol levels, getting them under 200 milligrams per deciliter or under 5 millimoles per liter. That's a ridiculous level. If your level is high and you're in your 60s, so you can actually get it under 200 without drug treatment, well, you're in the minority. I mean, I was only able to do it in cases of that extreme exercise that I told you about. Nevertheless, I believe in cases where there's a low quality lipid panel present, along with extremely high cholesterol, seeking to lower it may be legitimate. In that support group, anyone who offered advice on how to lower cholesterol through supplements or dietary changes would have their comments deleted and they'd be expelled from the group. I mean, if you present it as, hey, you need to lower your inflammation and don't mention that that might lower your cholesterol, you could get away with it. Well, I have a less dogmatic view. All positions about science should be based on experimental results, observation, and following the evidence wherever it brings you. It's not ideology. And the fact is, I agree with 99% about what the group was saying. It's the fact that the dissent wasn't tolerated that made me drop out. The evidence I'm talking about here is whether or not LDL really makes a difference. And I don't think it's actually proven 100% either way, which is going to get everybody mad at me because everybody either thinks, yeah, LDL definitely always makes a difference or LDL never makes a difference. Well, I'm somewhere in between. If you have oxidized LDL, that makes a difference. I told the support group lead there that I have a friend who has familial hypercholesterolemia, and I'd be sure to tell him not to try lowering his cholesterol, but I was going to wait until he recovers from his recent heart surgery. Then I left the group. So those are my positions. I know the ones on cholesterol levels will be controversial, and a lot of my viewers would disagree, and I'm only suggesting that there are some cases where lowering them may be appropriate. If you find this information to be useful, please like, share, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you'll always know when I posted something new. And the best part of all these actions is they're all free. And if you don't do any of them, I'll never know it. And I can't expel you from my viewership. If you haven't seen this video, I recommend you take a look at it now. Thanks for listening.